Some people believe we are products of our environment, while others believe your destiny is determined before you're even born. I don't know if one of these or both of these are true, but I do believe that even if someone makes changes to themselves on the outside, they can never change who they are at their core. Hi, I'm Cam,
And I'm Dev.
and you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up. So, Dev, today I'll be talking about a man named Nicholas Rossi or Nicholas Oliverdian. Have you heard of this man before?
Absolutely not. Not at all. Not a day in my life, I believe.
I'm actually kind of happy about that because this case has been getting some attention lately. And I would have been real disappointed if you'd heard of him. And I was actually even more scared that you might have been covering the same case because you had mentioned that your next case was convoluted. And this case is a bit convoluted. So I was a little nervous that we had the same case.
Look, it hasn't happened yet in almost 60 episodes. It's going to happen one day, I fear.
I have a feeling one day it's going to happen. I don't know what we're going to do on that day, but I do have a fear that one day it's going to happen.
Look, we're going to have to do an impromptu joint episode.
Listen.
And people at home, what's the over-under on if me and Cam are going to cover the same case before 100 episodes or after 100 episodes? I want to see what the people think is going to happen on that. I might even set up a poll on this episode just to see what you guys at home think.
Right. I'd like to know that too.
My vote is for over.
For sure. I think we can make it the next 40-ish episodes without covering the same case. Unfortunately, there are a lot of true crime cases out there, and y'all keep doing messed up stuff, so we have no shortage of cases to choose from.
Cheers to that.
Speaking of cheers, what you drinking, girl?
So I'm back with a drink that I actually debuted on Patreon, but I did mix it up a little bit this go around. So you can see her there. She is a shot of tequila mixed with some champagne. And on Patreon, I used lemon juice to sweeten it, but this time I used pineapple juice. And I think it is the superior option. So that's what I'm drinking tonight. You know, cute, light, and fresh. What about you, friend? What you drinking?
Girl, that sounds good. I am over here with a Spanish wine called Albarino. I believe it is from somewhere called Abadía de San Campio. I don't know where that is, but it is a 2022 Albarino from Spain.
And y'all, if you notice, Cam actually speaks Spanish, so we didn't botch the pronunciation like we be doing with those Italian wines and like the French ones especially, because she know that one.
And if I did botch the pronunciation, please be quiet. Thank you. But before we get into the story of Nicholas Rossi, I do want to extend some serious trigger warnings for sexual assault and domestic violence. So if you were to ask him, Nicholas Rossi was a lot of things: a loving husband, former congressional aide, Harvard alum, and an advocate for children in the U.S. foster care system. However, I'm going to tell our listeners that with today's case, we're going to peel back the curtains on this man who seemingly had so many accolades. Born on July 11th, 1987, as Nicholas Oliverdian, Nicholas was the oldest child in a tumultuous household. His father was apparently an alcoholic that was abusive to his wife and children, and his mom worked as a server while his father stayed consistently out of work, resulting in the family never having enough money. After having her third child, Nicholas's mother, Diana, divorced his father, Jack, and left him in 1989. A few years later, in 1994, Diana remarried to a man named David Rossi, who ended up adopting her 3 children. According to David, Nicholas was a troubled kid. He would hit his mom, grandma, and siblings. They took him to counselors and multiple hospitals, and at the age of 12, he was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and ADD and was sent to a treatment center. When he got out, he was put in foster care as his mother was at this point struggling with drug addiction and her marriage to David seemed to be on the outs.
Damn. So again, I already know this case is going to get convoluted and crazy. I don't know what we're talking about, but I can feel it in my bones. And I know Cam, and I know the kind of true crime she finds interesting. But at this moment, based on the information that I do know, I do feel really bad for Nicholas, because at the end of the day, children who grow up in abusive households are going to think that abuse is normal, and they're going to think that hitting is okay and that yelling and screaming is okay because that's what they've been exposed to. So I feel really bad that that was his early life, and he really showed as a product of his environment by putting his hands on other women in his life. And in that regard, for the child, Nicholas, I feel really bad for him.
Yeah, and I can definitely agree with that, especially a child lashing out like that at such a young age. I think, too, this is where the nature versus nurture discussion comes in, where even at such a young age, he had these violent tendencies, but he also had experienced likely so much violence, both witnessing it and experiencing it himself and seeing his siblings go through it. I will say his siblings also ended up in foster care, but I'm unsure where they ended up, what they ended up doing, and whether their lives would have a similar outcome as his. But unfortunately, due to a shortage of foster homes, Nicholas would be placed in a program at the age of 14 where he would essentially have to sleep at different temporary shelters each night. He described this as a terrible, scary experience where he was threatened, assaulted, and robbed, and said that he never really got to be a kid. This program would basically drop kids off at the Rhode Island State House early in the morning while they waited to find out where they'd be sleeping that night. But because of this, he actually got a lot of exposure to lawmakers and ended up getting a job as a page at the State House at the age of 14. He specifically began to advocate for reforms in the foster care system, which he alleged had allowed him to endure abuse and torture while he was in the system. At the age of 15, he started a nonprofit and called for reforms from the state, such as allowing orphans to attend the same school for an entire year rather than forcing them to change schools mid-year, also forcing the state to provide adequate medical care for orphans, and allowing them to participate in extracurricular activities at school. In what he feels was retribution for his advocacy and criticism against the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, or DCYF, he was apparently placed in group homes out of state. And in 2011, at the age of 18, he was no longer a ward of the state, and he was free to live his life as an adult. But having spent so much time in foster care, he felt like he never really got to be a kid. But still, he went forward with his life and attended college, even taking classes at a Harvard Extension School. However, at the age of 24, in 2011, he returned back to his roots of advocacy, filing a federal lawsuit against the state of Rhode Island, the Rhode Island DCYF, and some private facilities that contracted with them, as well as individuals, including the governor and several judges, alleging that they allowed the abuse of orphans to occur under the foster system and that the trauma he experienced significantly affected his ability to live a normal life. He also asked that the state put in law improvements to the care of foster kids, an oversight committee for the DCYF, and that they establish a Children's Bill of Rights. He was very much in front of the media, sitting down for interviews on radio and for newspapers to get the word out. DCYF, on the other hand, stated that any reports of abuse were fully investigated and that they did not have any data or evidence to support his claims. They also said that the process of sending children out of state, which he heavily criticized, occurred when they were dealing with children with specialized needs that could not be handled by the resources they had in state. Even though the bill, with the changes that he requested, ended up going to the Rhode Island House of Representatives, it died in committee and never became law. The lawsuit against Rhode Island and the other entities was eventually settled out of court in 2013 for $70,000.
That's it?
You know, Dev, that's a good point. And Nicholas alleged some serious things in that lawsuit, which makes you think, why would they settle for so little? Especially if he experienced this, there were likely others who experienced similar things.
Cam, don't do this to me. I can't do this again, Cam. Don't do this to me. Please. Please don't do this to me. Please don't take this the way that I think this is going, please.
I will say I'm not going to take it all the way you think it's going.
Okay.
But what you will learn about this man is that, unfortunately, many people have called into question the validity of many of the statements that he's made. Let's get into why. I told y'all at the beginning of the episode, we were going to peel back the curtains on this man. And before I do that, I will say there are serious problems with the foster care system. And I am sure that there is abuse going on in the system that has gone ignored. And so I don't want to discount any stories and experiences of people who have been in the foster care system and have experienced this abuse. But I will say, when it comes to Nicholas's story specifically, y'all will see why people call into question some of the specific allegations that he made.
God dang it, Cam. God dang it, girl. I was getting ready to go on. I know the case is going to turn because of how you started off. I know the case is going to turn eventually, but again, wow, I feel so bad for this kid. And this guy grew up and made something of himself and took his allegations to court, which is what you should do. If you have people in your life that have wronged you, you have a legal mechanism to go after those people. And I'm proud of people when they sue people legitimately for the wrong things they have done. Oh no. Oh no. Okay, let me shut up. Let me shut up and listen. Dear God.
So I mentioned that he filed the lawsuit in 2011 and eventually settled it in 2013. It's not like he was just sitting on his behind from the ages of 18 to about 24. Because at the beginning of 2008, we're going to start to see his other side. At this point, he was 21 and had moved from Rhode Island to Dayton, Ohio, where he was attending college. That January in Dayton, he would reach out to a woman named Mary on MySpace, and they made plans for him to walk her to class at her college. In their discussion on MySpace, he mentioned that he was new to the area and looking for friends. And you know, this was the beginning of online dating, and people were unfortunately a bit too trusting when it came to meeting people online. And this is not a knock on Mary. This is just a sign of the time, similar to how people used to hitchhike all the time in the 70s and 80s.
Exactly. That's a great counterpoint. Unfortunately, the world has just become less safe.
Exactly. So instead of the friendly walk that Mary probably expected, Nicholas essentially ended up cornering her in a secluded location and forcing himself on her. According to Mary, she made it clear that she did not want his advances and did not want to be there. He apparently apologized to her after this and asked her not to go to the police. Mary, however, would quickly file a complaint with police, and Nicholas was charged with public indecency and sexual imposition, a misdemeanor. They collected his DNA, and as a result of the charges, he was eventually fined and required to register as a sex offender until 2023.
Good for you, Mary. Good for you. Standing up for yourself and taking that to the police. Good for you.
Exactly, because I can't imagine how scary it is to not only experience that, but then have to advocate for yourself. And I am glad in this case that her allegations were taken seriously and that she was able to take him to court and get him charged, because we've heard of way too many cases where these allegations are not taken seriously and somebody like him continues to walk around. Even though in this case, he was still walking free because he was just fined and required to register as a sex offender, it is still on his record.
Exactly. And again, I've talked about this on the podcast before. Some justice is better than no justice.
Exactly. Now, let's get into some of the grimy stuff he did during these court proceedings. In what many think was an attempt to get sympathy from the court, he would often show up to court with a cane. And in one instance, he even tried to Photoshop a MySpace post showing Mary claiming she was lying about the allegations. Unfortunately for him, the date on the Photoshop post didn't even line up with the day of the week.
If you're gonna lie, lie well. Oh my God, I hate stupid people. I hate stupid people so much. I'm sorry if that's problematic for me to say, but I do.
Me too, girl. And I hate unnecessarily vindictive people even more because even after he'd been charged, Nicholas was not done putting Mary through it. He ended up suing her for defamation and claimed that she, quote, targeted him with criminal litigation because of her unfaithful relationships and infidelity, end quote. Fortunately, a judge would dismiss this lawsuit and say that his claims were baseless. But over the next 6 years, he would continue harassing her by doxing her and posting photos of her and her children.
Oh, I would go to prison. I would be in prison if somebody was out there posting pictures of my children.
And her phone number.
Oh, I would be in prison. Honestly, I wouldn't care if you do it to me. I'm an adult. I can do what I need to do to make it right. My children, I will be in prison. Ooh. And though this argument is always put forth in sexual assault cases, it still pisses me off every time I hear it because it's like, oh, she just wanted to hide her infidelity. So she said I assaulted her. That argument grinds my gears more than I could think I could ever put into words. Because you really think that she's going to potentially put herself in this situation to perjure herself, ruin her life, go through all the trauma of court and potentially testifying and everything else so she don't get dumped? Does that make any logical sense whatsoever?
Right. Because that's a traumatic experience in itself.
Come on now.
So at this point, Nicholas basically became an incel. And he even posted an essay called, quote, My Personal 9/11, end quote, where he blamed Mary for ruining his life.
Grow the fuck up. Grow the actual fuck up. That's all the commentary I have in that moment. That is all.
Well, you're going to have a lot more. Because less than 8 months later, in September of 2008, Nicholas had gone from Ohio to Orem, Utah, and had changed his name from Nicholas Aliverdian to Nicholas Rossi, taking the last name of his stepfather. Now, thinking about the charge in his case where he had to register as a sex offender, I wonder why he might have wanted to change his name. Audience, gold star for whoever can guess the reason first.
Right, because, I just can't possibly think of another reason why somebody who is a sexual deviant and on the registry would ever want to change their name and potentially hide their identity. Just like, crazy talk to me, really.
Right. Who knows why? So while in Utah, he met a woman who I'll refer to as Kay on MySpace. They dated for a little bit, but she cut him off after he, quote, became increasingly aggressive and borrowed money without paying her back, end quote. Around mid-September, he finally agreed to pay her back, so she went over to his place. Instead, he violently sexually assaulted her. Kay reported this to the authorities and had a rape kit done. However, because of the large backlog of rape kits, Nicholas would not be linked to this crime as a suspect until 2018. What I can't understand is why Kay's testimony would not be enough. I'm unsure if she was not willing to testify or if there was some other reason why they were not able to fully pursue him as a suspect.
10 years? 10 years? I refuse to believe that there's 10 years worth of rape kits sitting on a shelf. Because if there are, there's even deeper issues here. Who else is just now getting justice from a decade ago?
From what I've heard, girl, unfortunately, that seems to be the case in a lot of jurisdictions. And it's also the case that, if you have the money, you can move it up in line. But I think it's also the resources that they have to run these. And that's why I have heard of initiatives where there are nonprofits that are basically paying to have these rape kits processed a lot faster, because there's no reason somebody should wait 10 years plus, really, in some cases, to have their rape kit analyzed and processed.
Exactly. And then the thing that's really annoying about that is you automatically give the defense the best argument ever. How can you trust that DNA? DNA's 10 years old. That's the first argument that any defense attorney is going to make. They would make that if the DNA was taken yesterday, but it adds a lot more weight to their argument when it's 10 years old.
So I think the other bad part about this is it also allows sexual deviants like Nicholas to stay on the outside, to not face the consequences of their actions.
That part.
Because just a couple months later, in December of 2008, Nicholas was less than an hour drive away in South Salt Lake, Utah. There, he'd met a woman that we're going to call M, again, through MySpace. MySpace needs to block him. But they dated for a bit before Nicholas proposed and bought wedding rings. However, after M realized how manipulative he was, she realized she wanted to break up with him. When she went to his house to have this discussion, he didn't let her leave and ended up sexually assaulting her. And he actually didn't get charged in M's assault case until after he was identified in K's case. So again, more than 10 years. So one thing y'all gonna realize about this man is he be bit bopping around. Less than 2 years later, in November 2010, he was back in Rhode Island and married. Unsurprisingly, this marriage didn't last long because just days after his marriage, he was arrested for assaulting his wife. This assault, which resulted in noticeable injuries on his wife, was apparently over a crying baby. That was not the wife's baby. It apparently belonged to their friend who was visiting. But regardless, he was hitting his wife in front of not only a baby, but also her friend. Even if no one was there, it still wouldn't make it right, but it just makes it worse. According to the wife's testimony, during the assault, he physically harmed her and refused to let her leave. But Nicholas claimed that he did not assault her, but he ended up pleading no contest to the charges and was sentenced to probation.
I don't understand how. Is Nicholas white? Enough said.
For the Spotify listeners, I just gave Dev a look.
I'm not even going to say the next thing I was going to say because now I understand. Is Nicholas conventionally attractive? That's the other question.
No, not to me.
Conventionally attractive, Cam.
I would still say no.
Okay.
He looked like an incel.
Fair enough. But you just answered every question I need to know. It's fine. And especially, I had so much hope at the beginning of this because Mary made her statement. She was believed. She got that man on the sex offenders registry. She got a little bit, just teensy tiny, not enough, but a teensy tiny bit of justice in that case. And then for him to then just go on and become a serial rapist with no consequences, so far anyways, presumably at this point in the story till at least 2019. How? And police officers find any reason to stop any person of color on the street. I don't get it. I hate it here sometimes.
Girl, I don't get it either. What I will say though is because those rape kits were not processed until 10 years later, it's likely that whatever judge was looking at his case in Rhode Island didn't have the context of the sexual assault charges in Utah, but they would have had the context of the sexual assault charge in Ohio, potentially, but who knows how well these jurisdictions are talking to each other, unfortunately.
Right, because if they're not processing the rape kits for 10 years, I'm sure nobody's sending an email to me like, hey, by the way, this guy is a predator.
Right. And it actually reminds me of when we covered the Africa Hardy case and we were talking about Darren Van. He was getting charged in different jurisdictions for crazy stuff, but he ended up getting like probation or some sort of lighter sentence in one jurisdiction because they didn't have the context of some other stuff that he'd done in another.
Right. And it was his first offense.
Right.
And for some reason, specifically when it's sexual assault, they always want to go lighter on their first offense.
So again, this man loved to bit bop around. By 2015, he'd gone back to Dayton, Ohio. And here he started a nonprofit that apparently aimed to rejuvenate downtown Dayton, Ohio.
I'm so sorry. Quick question. After the wife went to the police, did she leave him? Is she still with him? Did they get divorced? Like, what happened there to close the loop on that for me?
They got divorced. I don't have exactly when they got divorced, but they definitely got divorced sometime between 2010 and 2015, likely shortly after this assault case.
Okay, good. I just wanted her to get away from him.
And unfortunately, I know that because in April of that year, he met his future second wife, a woman named Catherine Heckendorn, at a Mormon singles event. And 6 months later, they were married. This wasn't necessarily a celebratory occasion, The way that Catherine describes it, he quote unquote broke her down, and they basically had a courthouse ceremony. According to her, he showed the signs of his manipulative and abusive ways early in the relationship. He first hit her the day they got married, and he essentially isolated her from family and friends and controlled aspects of her life like what she could wear. And I am just going to give a warning to our listeners that I'm about to go into detail on some serious domestic violence. So I would skip forward about 30 to 45 seconds if you don't want to hear that. We'll also put the exact timestamps in the description of the video. In an interview, Catherine said, quote, "I would be hit on a daily occurrence. I would be put down verbally and told just how stupid, dumb I was. If I didn't act that way, I wouldn't have to get hurt." End quote. Catherine would also describe the sexual abuse she experienced at his hands. And she spoke about times where he would threaten her with a knife, either at her throat or his throat.
I feel so bad for Catherine. And another reason why I feel really bad for Catherine is, unfortunately, I'm going to assume that Catherine is Mormon, as they met at this Mormon singles night. And something that is really scary to me, specifically when it comes to the Mormon church, is the way that they're like, oh, y'all have known each other for 45 days. Go ahead and get married. You'll figure it out later. It'll be great. And in my experience and understanding, the church doesn't do a lot to advocate for specifically women in, getting to know somebody, getting to vetting out the kind of person they are, who they are to other people. And they very much rush people into marriages that may not be good for them, which I will say one of the things that really put a pit in my stomach as soon as you said it is the fact that he hit her the day they got married. Because my biggest fear was, oh my God, and the Mormon church doesn't do divorce. What is going to happen to this poor woman because the Mormon church doesn't do divorce? I was terrified, in all honesty. And there's one thing I want to talk about really in particular that I don't think a lot of people talk about. The first time your partner, significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend makes an attempt on their life as something that you have done, leave them. That is abuse. That is manipulative. It is trying to place the weight of their life on yours and trying to make it seem like it's your fault that they would harm themselves. One, that is never your fault. Two, if somebody chooses to make that choice to themselves, it's not your fault. And I stand firm in that is abuse. If you stop talking to your boyfriend and he's like, if you don't answer me, I'm going to kill myself, that's abuse. And if you stop talking to your girlfriend and she's like, I'm going to go jump off the closest building, that is abuse. You need to leave them as safely and quickly as possible. So that's something that really stood out to me when you were talking, that he would threaten to harm himself, supposedly because of what she was doing.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say that there have been other cases that have unfortunately ended much worse, involving people who are Mormon, where the wife felt like she could not leave. There were even some cases where it was so bad that the church was like, we support you leaving. But even though the church supported them, there was still that societal pressure of wanting to maintain the outside appearance of a happy family. But fortunately for Catherine, a few months later, she was able to leave Nicholas and file for divorce. She also had a recording of one of his attacks, which bolstered her case. In her divorce filing, she accused him of quote unquote extreme cruelty and gross neglect of duty. And on top of the physical abuse, she'd stated that she'd loaned him $52,000 for his nonprofit that he refused to pay back.
Brokey. Sorry, I needed to lighten the mood. One, proud of her for getting a divorce. Proud of her for leaving. Proud of her for taking that step. Again, like you're saying, even if the church was on her side, willing to go against the societal pressure of getting a divorce. Because there are people in this world who genuinely believe that there is no reason to ever get a divorce. And I mean that in the fullest way possible. So I'm proud of her for doing that. I'm proud of her for getting out as safely as she can. Another thing I'm very proud of her for, and I know this is a controversial thing to a lot of people, but for recording what she went through. And I personally am a member of the Trust But Verify group. So I initially always believe people when they come forward with their story. But to have that recording, to be able to show in court that this man is violent towards you, is evil towards you, it just adds so much protection to you. And I know people feel some type of way about that. People don't love the idea of victims recording instances of abuse or having evidence of abuse. But those same people will tell you, well, I don't see any bruises and I never saw this and I never saw that. So how do I know that actually happened? So if you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, go ahead and do.
Exactly. And the past 20 or so minutes have shown that this is an extremely abusive man, not just physically, not just sexually, but also financially.
Yes.
And not just to his partners. It also came to light that while in Ohio, he'd reconnected with his foster parents and ended up using their names on paperwork for his nonprofit without their knowledge. By 2017, he'd also stolen his former foster father's identity, took out credit cards in his name, and racked up nearly $200,000 in debt before disappearing.
How the hell did he do that?
Girl, I feel like it's one of those things where when you have good credit, the credit card company is not really going to be after you. Like when you have good credit, unfortunately, those people are the main targets for identity thieves because they know they can do a bunch of stuff before you start catching on, especially if you're not pulling your credit reports on a frequent basis. I'm sure his foster father had good credit, owned a home, owned a car, all this stuff, wasn't needing to check his credit report until stuff got flagged. And the credit card companies were like, oh, you got an 820, 850 credit score. You want to take another card? Go ahead.
Right. And maybe this is just a product of somebody who just doesn't have that much history of credit, doesn't have that much credit. Right. But I was like, $200,000. You have $200,000 of available credit?
Girl, apparently it was about 22 credit cards.
Okay. I don't even know what to say to that. I got nothing.
So when I say he disappeared, I mean he disappeared. He had apparently even rekindled a relationship with his uncle on his father's side in the past decade, and he had ceased communication with him. The uncle didn't know what happened to him, where he went. But also remember that this time period of him doing all the sexual assault and these issues with his wife also coincided with when he was doing a lot of that advocacy for foster youths and was involved with the lawsuit with the Rhode Island DCYF.
Wait a minute. I completely forgot about all of that. So he's out here running amok and being a menace to society, but then also still trying to sue, trying to have a nonprofit, trying to do all that. I don't know how I forgot that, but I did.
Yes. So keep this in mind that he was doing media appearances and all this. So he had a bit of a local media presence.
Wait, okay. But that even stresses me out a little bit because I'm like, he's doing media appearances, but he has all these very publicly accessible court documents about his actions. Is nobody vetting him? Because again, he got on the registry forever ago.
Remember, at this point, he was going by Nicholas Rossi. So remember another thing, those Utah sexual assaults did not get tied to him until 2018. And his abuse of his second wife didn't happen until 2015, 2 years after the lawsuit was settled. So by 2011 and 2013, when he was doing all this and was in the public eye, the only thing that would have been on his record would have been the sexual assault case in Dayton, Ohio, which, since it was out of state, may not have been as easily accessible or something that people would easily find with it being in the early 2010s. And the other thing would have been that divorce and the assault, which he pleaded no contest to, which even if somebody could find the harrowing details involved in that, there's a potential that, oh, he's advocating for, foster youths. He might have a troubled past, but it's because he had such a rough upbringing. Not excusing him or them, but adding more color to why he was able to have a positive media appearance despite having these things in his legal history.
I mean, you spitting every fact imaginable, friend.
Right. So, unfortunately for his many victims, it seemed that they would never really get justice because in December 2019, he announced that he'd been diagnosed with late-stage non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, an aggressive form of cancer. And just a couple months later, in February 2020, several reporters received an email from his wife Louise announcing that he'd succumbed to the disease, leaving behind his wife and 2 children. And Dev, that would be the end of our story. Except, just a year later, Nicholas would be arrested in Scotland under the name Arthur Knight.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Please hold. Oh my God. Wait a minute. Wait a goddamn minute. Cam, I do think I know this case, but I remember it for one specific moment. And if it is the case that I think it is, I haven't looked at this case in a very long time. So I obviously didn't remember all the details and I didn't remember the names. But if this is what I think it is, I'm going to laugh so hard in the next 15 minutes that I start crying. And I'm going to leave it right there.
So, Dev, it probably is the case you're thinking of. So, the man named Arthur Knight, aka Nicholas Rossi, aka Nicholas Alaverdian, had been arrested while he was being treated for COVID at a hospital. And he'd been reported as part of an Interpol notice, and they had identified him based on the tattoos on his arms. His identity was confirmed when they collected his DNA because he was at the hospital. But Arthur Knight would claim, "I'm not Nicholas Rossi. I'm Arthur Knight. I'm an Irish orphan who's been living in Scotland and has been married to my dear wife who I met in 2011, living in the quiet town of Glasgow." And his neighbors would say that he seemed at first to be a fairly quiet man who claimed to be a professor and could often be seen at the pub getting a beer. But his neighbors also noticed that he had a bit of a temper, including in one instance where he yelled at a delivery man for being a few minutes late. And even though he tried to put on this demeanor of being your calm, neighborly, posh British man, some of his neighbors felt that something was a bit off about him.
Well, yeah, he's from Rhode Island.
No, Devin, his name is Arthur Knight. So, girl, when I say he committed to the bit, he committed to the bit. He kept the British accent. He kept with the story that he was an Irish orphan turned married businessman. This man was even giving interviews to Dateline.
And I'm pretty sure I've seen it. I'm pretty sure this is the one I know. That's why I know this case. But I knew Arthur King. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Ridiculous. But in January of 2022, Utah announced that they were seeking to extradite him for the 2008 sexual assault cases. They claimed that he'd actually fled the US in 2017 and gone to Dublin to evade fraud charges and a charge for failing to register as a sex offender.
Of course.
In November of 2022, a Scottish judge ruled that Nicholas Alaverdian / Nicholas Rossi and Arthur Knight were the same person based on photograph and fingerprint evidence. But it would take more than a year until he was actually extradited because his lawyer kept trying to get his case dismissed since he was wanted for questioning in relation to a sexual assault case in England.
Why am I surprised? Why am I surprised?
Right.
There's no way this dude was ever going to go across the pond and be better. That was never going to happen. Oh God, give me 2 seconds. I want to confirm this is the thing I saw. The person I saw, if you don't mind. Yep, that's the one. That's the one. Okay.
So, like I said, it would take more than a year until he was actually extradited. But in early 2024, he was extradited back to the US and booked in a Utah jail. In October of 2024, he testified to the court that he was actually Nicholas Rossi, but he didn't flee the country to evade the fraud charges and failing to register as a sex offender. He fled the country and changed his name and accent because there were, quote, credible threats to his life, end quote, due to his work as a foster youth advocate.
Oh, that's why there was threats on your life, not the fact that you assaulted multiple women.
Yeah.
I would have believed you had you said there was threats on your life from the multiple women that you assaulted. I would have believed you.
Oh, well, girl, he pled not guilty to those assault charges, though.
Correct. Of course he did. Of course he did. He pled no contest to the other one. He's always pled not guilty.
And the judge in this case called him on his bullshit and noted that in addition to the sexual assault investigations, plural, Nicholas was being investigated for fraud by the FBI. That's what happens when you rack up $200,000 in credit card debt under someone else's name. And you do it by getting the IRS to send you their tax return.
Come on now. Oh, you really played with the 3-letter agencies and thought that wasn't going to come back around.
Right.
Some people ain't scared enough.
Exactly. So, listeners, you'll notice it is June 2025. I said that he gave his first testimony to the court in October 2024. If you know anything about the U.S. court system, it does not move quickly. So, unfortunately, his trials for both the Utah sexual assault cases will not take place until August and September of this year, which is 2025 for any future listeners. So, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a few months to know the outcomes of both of these cases. M's case, which took place in Salt Lake City, is scheduled for a 7-day trial in late August, while K's case, which took place in Orem, Utah, is scheduled for a 12-day trial in September. As of May 2025, the judges in both cases have decided to close the evidentiary hearings due to the attention on the case and the potential impact to jury selection. The evidentiary hearing for M's case took place May 15th of this year, while the evidentiary hearing for K's case is scheduled for June 23rd, just a couple weeks from now. While we won't know the details and outcome of this case until later this year, we do know that prosecutors in both Utah cases have asked that the respective judges allow evidence from the other case, his extradition from the UK, and other alleged crimes. And a final tidbit, we also know that Nicholas Rossi has asked the judge in both cases to refer to him and change the name of the case to Nicholas Alaverdian because the name Rossi causes him too much distress. He claims that he later learned his stepfather had a history of violence and child abuse, and that people working in the jail used the name Rossi in a derogatory way.
Oh, she passed away. Anyways.
So while the judge in M's case agreed to unofficially use Alaverdian in court, the judge in K's case said that the alleged crimes were done using the name Rossi, so that's the name he's going to use.
Exactly.
So I will say, basically, this was not a formal verbal agreement. I think he basically said he's going to use both names. And there also wasn't a formal verbal request like there was in K's case.
Fair enough. But I don't think that's appropriate. Judge number 1, I don't like your ruling. So how I feel is you should do it like judge number 2. Whatever name he had when he committed the crime is the name he should go by. And, sir, your stepfather was an abuser. What are you? It sounds like you living up to the name if daddy was allegedly so bad. But unfortunately for you, I don't believe that either.
Right. And I'll also say, if you want to use Alaverdian, we definitely going to use the fact that under the name Nicholas Alaverdian, you were registered as a sex offender until 2023.
Come on now.
And I think your last point is an important one. We can't really believe anything he says, from the claims he made about his upbringing in the foster care system to any claims he's even making about jailers being rude to him. Although I probably do believe that, because if I was a jailer, I'd be rude to him too.
You're right. And like real life, jails don't like people who commit crimes against women and children. So he probably is getting dogged out in prison. Do I care?
Anyways, that is the end of our story. But listeners, do trust that when his trial comes around later this year, we are going to do an update to this episode and close the loop for y'all. We typically don't do cases where we haven't fully finalized everything, but I found this story and I just couldn't wait a few months to tell this to you, Dev.
Yeah, girl, I'm glad you did it. And I think it's hilarious that I didn't put this story together until the end, because I've seen the Dateline interview and he's sitting on there fake crying about how he doesn't know who Nicholas is. And he's got this, for some reason, he has an oxygen mask on. I don't know what that's about.
COVID.
Oh, it's COVID this time. Got it. And I just remember watching this and being like, am I supposed to be sympathetic? Am I supposed to feel feelings? Why am I laughing so hard? And Cam, did you watch that interview as part of your research?
Girl, honestly, I have not yet, but it is on my list to watch. I've listened to clips as part of my research, but I haven't watched the interview.
Girl, maybe to check it off your list, we need to watch it together on Patreon, because that interview is one, I'm going to go ahead and let you know, one of the most disrespectful pieces of media I've seen, but also one of the funniest, because I didn't know about the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, but it tracks so perfectly because he thinks he's doing something. He thinks that people believe him. He thinks that people are on his side. He thinks that we're as stupid as he is.
Right.
It is both hilarious and infuriating because you know what he's accused of. You know the crimes he allegedly committed. And I'm sitting here being like, this dude is comical. This defense is comical.
Literally. And speaking of, I can't wait to hear the defense in this case, especially if prosecutors are able to bring in all the other evidence, which I hope they are.
I absolutely believe they should be able to because, again, him fleeing the country is a direct result of his crimes. He ain't fleeing the country if he don't got a laundry list of crimes. He ain't faking his death and leaving the country. Because hold up now, because that's what he did. He fakes his death and fled the country.
Girl, and I didn't even get into it. So the wife, Louise, everybody thinks she fake because by the time that she posted that, and remember, this wasn't necessarily a real obituary. She sent an email from the family office to some reporters.
Right.
And they were like, we can't really find anything to validate that this actually happened. So when she sent this email to the reporters and they couldn't validate it, but it was still announced, there were still people who didn't believe it was true, including his foster father, the victims of his crimes, and people he worked with at the State House. There was even a story where someone who he worked with at the State House as a campaign manager, he basically effed them over and threw them under the bus, claiming that they'd stolen another candidate's campaign signs. And he went on an interview and said this.
Oh, Lord.
So, yeah. And again, I will say, going back to his advocacy for foster youth, there are a lot of problems in the U.S. foster care system, in the U.S. adoption system. And I am not discounting any stories of abuse, any experiences of abuse that people have experienced. I am just calling into question the stories from Nicholas Rossi / Nicholas Oliverian.
Exactly. And I think that's perfectly valid. But also, here's the thing. You can have significantly awful, horrible trauma that takes a toll on your whole life. And if you go out and then proceed to still be a terrible person, one does not negate the other.
Exactly.
It can serve as context. It can be a reason, but it's not an excuse. Because there is this beautiful, lovely thing called therapy, called self-development, called growth, called wanting to be better than your parents and the system that you were in. Because unfortunately, I do believe the majority of what he said from a perspective of, I can believe that happened. I can believe that the foster system did not take care of him, because I know people personally who the foster system was very, very poor to them. So because I know that happens, a broken clock is right twice a day. So I will give him that. But do I believe everything? Especially when you only got 70 grand out of it? No. People have got millions and millions of dollars for less.
Exactly.
But girl, thank you for talking about this story. I have not looked into this story or thought about this story since he gave that Dateline interview. I watched that Dateline interview. Very unlike me. I didn't do any research to close the loop on that. I watched that interview and I was like, wow, this guy's a piece of shit. And I just moved on. And I'm glad I didn't, because you got to unfold it all for me and it clicked together in the last possible second. And you did a great job telling this story. And best believe we absolutely will be tracking this case. We will be providing updates for you all, because I'm tracking quite a few cases this year and I might just have to add this one to the list.
Our very long list.
Absolutely. As we wrap up today's episode, we're going to move over into our segment called Today in Crime, where we'll discuss a crime or crime-related event that took place on this day. So, on June 6, 1966, James H. Meredith, who in 1962 became the first African American to attend the University of Mississippi, is shot by a sniper shortly after beginning a lone civil rights march through the South, known as the March Against Fear. James Meredith had been walking from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi in an attempt to encourage voter registration by African Americans in the South. A former serviceman in the U.S. Air Force, James Meredith applied and was accepted to the University of Mississippi in 1962. But his admission was revoked when the registrar learned of his race. A federal court ordered Ole Miss to admit him. But when he tried to register on September 20th, 1962, he found the entrance to the office blocked by a Mississippi governor, Ross Barnett. On September 28th, the governor was found guilty of civil contempt and was ordered to cease his interference with desegregation at the university or face arrest and a fine of $10,000 a day. 2 days later, Meredith was escorted onto the Ole Miss campus by U.S. Marshals, setting off riots that resulted in the death of 2 students. He returned the next day and began classes. In 1963, James Meredith, who was a transfer student from all-black Jackson State College, graduated with a degree in political science. 3 years later, James Meredith returned to the public eye when he began his march against fear. On June 6, just 1 day into the march, he was sent to a hospital by a sniper's bullet. Other civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr. and Stokely Carmichael, arrived to continue the march on his behalf. It was during the March Against Fear that Stokely Carmichael, who was leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee, first spoke publicly of Black Power, his concept of militant African American nationalism. James Meredith later recovered and rejoined the march he had originated, and on June 26, the marchers successfully reached Jackson, Mississippi. And James Meredith is still alive and kicking in Kawasi, Mississippi at 91 years old. If you found this story interesting, leave a school emoji in the comments.
I am so glad he survived because unfortunately there are way too many stories where people did not survive. And all he was doing was trying to help people exercise the right to vote.
Exactly. It is beautiful that he lived. It's beautiful the struggle that he went through at such a young age. And I'm proud of his ability to endure, his ability to pursue, and his ability to commit and finish that march.
Right. And this is just another example of the things that people went through to ensure we have the right to vote. I'm not going to say I don't care who you vote for, because I definitely do when it comes to certain elections. Cough, cough.
Nudge, nudge.
Please make sure you're voting, not just at the presidential level, at the local level.
And in a lot of ways, the local level is more important.
You don't like that it's people speeding on your road and you got kids? Vote. You don't like that it's no traffic light at that intersection and you feel like it's dangerous? Vote. That's local elections.
Come on now. You don't like your sheriff or your governor? Vote. Local elections.
You don't like your DA? Vote.
Come on now. And that's the one that everybody always forgets. That's the one that people don't really think about. Your DA, especially if you live in a jurisdiction that has an elected DA, is important.
Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope. That's all I've got.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode. I would especially like to thank NBC, BBC, and the Swindled podcast for providing most of the material for this episode. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish podcast. And if you're listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel and feel free to leave any questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.
Bye.